Stress is unavoidable. Between work, home, social media, and even healthy stressors like hitting the gym, they all take their toll. This is why prioritizing recovery, both mental and physical, is so important. Before our body forces us to take a break, often at the most inopportune time. Zamia Cohen is here to provide some practical steps on how this can be done, all while trying to live our optimal lives. This is the No Excuse to Miss podcast. Welcome to the No Excuse to Miss podcast. I'm your host, Scott Volquartsen, and this week's guest is a personal trainer, a coach, and the founder and CEO of Good Human Fitness. Welcome to the show, Zamia Cohen. How are you doing, Zamia?
I am doing well. I am doing very well, rounding out the week.
Well, I am looking forward to this one because I followed you for a long time now on social media, and I always admire you are always like positive, energetic, and happy.
Yeah.
Which is not the norm right now on social media. I'm guilty of it. We're all guilty of it, that it's easy to be negative or divisive. So I kind of want to get started. First, can you kind of give us your background of where you started and what was the reason that you transitioned to like Good Human Fitness from your personal training or coaching?
Yeah. So in the very, very beginning, if you will, I was med school bound. That was my initial plan. I was convinced I wanted to be a pediatrician. Long story short, I knew I wasn't going to get into medical school straight out of college. So I went to grad school because I love school, but I was afraid to be out of school. So I went and got a master's degree because that's what you do when you're afraid to not be in school. But in physiology, which is obviously all the systems of the body, or at least what we knew then, a million years ago. And about halfway through my master's degree, I changed my mind on medical school, more for lifestyle reasons, not so much of what that would have been doing in terms of helping people be healthier and have a better quality of life. But lifestyle wise, it just changed things for me. So I got into personal training and pretty quickly realized it was a much better fit for me to help people have a better quality of life, because I got to see them multiple times a week. We got to talk about nutrition. We got to talk about daily behaviors. We got to move. We got to work on pain. We got to work on sleep, all of the things that factor into how we feel and how we function, and how we live in the world that we are in. And what I thought was going to be like a little 2-year stint, 20 years later, has become what I say is my way of practicing medicine. I worked for a very high-end company for 14 and a half years, which was longer than I obviously thought I would be there, and was just finally ready to branch out and do my own thing and shift, focus a little bit more. I still do in-person training. It's a smaller part of my business compared to then when that's all I did was personal training and nutrition coaching. And now I have a small percentage of in-person clients for training, and then I have online clients for training or nutrition, which is all not remote, although given COVID, some of it's still remote. But it's to do on their own time, still customized to them, but it lets me work with people in other parts of the country. Or if our schedules just don't meet. Like I actually have a former client who, timing wise, it doesn't work. So I just designed his program for him to do in the gym based on him, based on what he has access to, time he has. So still all very customized to his life. And same with nutrition.
And how much easier has that gotten with like technology if you can't be in person? They could still send you videos or...
Yeah, I'm not going to say it's ever going to be the same as being in person, because it's not. I can't do a 360 degree walk around a client while they're doing a movement when it's a virtual situation, or if they're sending me a video. But I've let go of certain things I had a hard time feeling like I had to have control over with clients in terms of their well-being and watching and form. Everyone says I'm a stickler for form, and yeah, form is important. Absolutely. You have to earn being able to kind of understand how to get away with form not being perfect, but you don't start there. And yeah, so I definitely have gotten a little better with some options with the virtual stuff I am still doing training wise. But I'll have clients that are on their own time. Like if something like, my knee hurt when I do this, I'll always ask them to send me a video from as many angles as they can get so I can give them a double check on form, things like that. And whenever I start with somebody new, there's a big assessment of movement so I can see what's going on.
And you'll know this a lot more than me, but the one thing I've always noticed is like, typically if it's my knee hurting or something like that, the pain is coming from somewhere else in my body.
Yeah. Often it's the joint above or below. Not always. Sometimes it legit is the knee. But it's often not. And sometimes it's a nice little easy tweak, like, I'll give a cue to hopefully get a desired result. And often that'll be enough, like that shift of weight or using their whole foot. People always think of like drive into your heels when you're squatting. Well, I don't actually want your toes popping up, right? We want your big toe coming into play. We want your whole foot grabbing the floor. So sometimes it can just be a cue that helps correct why there's pain because something isn't engaging or firing.
And I think that's the stuff, those little secrets that you guys find from being in the gym for so many years.
Yeah.
That in today's world, there's so many online trainers or online coaches who haven't spent time. We see it in our industry where you want to be Insta famous, but you don't want to put all the hours in.
Yep.
To gain that knowledge where you can look at somebody and say, hey, move this, a half inch this way or do that, just change something so little or so subtle.
Yeah.
And it will completely change the outcome. Like I said, we see it.
Absolutely. And I mean, even I still have two clients, a husband and wife, who are still remote because I want them to be comfortable with, everything. They're older. Especially because I'm not there, though we're virtually training, which is just weird in general, but it's just like a whole, I'm like, okay, you're in this little screen. But I'll often repeat certain cues because though I can't see if it's happening, like bracing, right? Bracing your spine. Like, I don't know if you're doing that. And I certainly can't tell because I don't have a good enough view of certain parts that should be engaged when that's happening. And bracing of the spine is one that fixes so much when it's not actually happening. And when you're not used to doing it and doing it properly, because it's not the same as sucking in, which a lot of people don't realize, it makes a huge difference. It stabilizes your spine. It helps your pelvis. It helps your shoulder girdle when you're doing all of it properly. And so those little things, even if a client just sends me a message during a certain exercise, especially when it's something like a deadlift or a squat, I'm like, were you bracing your spine on every rep? Were you not breathing out at the bottom? All those little things that change the stability of the spine, even if I'm not there, are common things that will be why certain pain comes into play. Again, not always, but there's a lot of trends with that kind of stuff, which is great that after 20 years, I figured out at least some of the go-tos.
Well, and, because the training's supposed to enhance our life, not hinder what we can do, where we can't move the next day. And that's kind of what I want to dive into is your mission statement on your website says that you want to help people live an optimal life by being good to oneself, one's family, one's community, and our planet through movement, nutrition, and lifestyle management. So when you say optimal life, I think so many times people equate that to like money in the bank or, what society tells us is optimal. So like for you, what does that optimal life look like?
I mean, me personally or me in my mission statement?
Both, I guess, for you and what you're trying to, when you're coaching people, I realize a lot of times you're coaching them maybe on movements or the physical part of it. But I think the mental aspect that goes along with all that,
for sure.
To me, it's all intertwined.
Absolutely.
Or interconnected. Yeah. You can't just have one, at least if you can be in the best shape of your life, but if mentally you're having all sorts of problems, you're not going to be happy.
Absolutely. And yet,
You can have all the money in the world, but if you're 100 pounds overweight and have health problems and everything, that's not optimal either.
Or don't, but have all the money in the world and are completely unhappy and miserable, looking into that. And I obviously have to stay within my scope of practice with all of that. But at the end of the day, for me, essentially what I'm doing is behavior management, right? My means is through nutrition largely and through training, but in that is conversations about sleep. It's about headspace. It's about digestion. I have more poop conversations than probably anybody you know. That's not actually regularly, because it's very telling. But there's so much that goes into that. And for me, optimal, my optimal for me is the same as my mission statement, in that it's specific to each person, what their best life would be for them. But generally it includes physically feeling well, having your body do what you want it to do when you want it to do it, enjoying time with your family, with yourself, doing the things you love, being in a good headspace, sleeping well, feeling good. And we feel all the things. We feel bad, we feel angry, all of that's part of it, but not letting it move us more permanently in a direction that we don't want to be, understanding how to manage that and listen to it and address it. And again, I'm limited on where I can go with this. And I have a great therapist that I refer people out to who are open to it, because quite frankly, a lot of people benefit. And I've been very grateful for those clients who, when I've brought it up very cautiously, but felt the window open that it would be received, they've received it well and taken me up on it. So optimal, I want people to be as happy as they can be. And I realize me happy is not the same as everybody else. I realize I am wired a certain way. I am a certain type of person, but I also find that also being supported for some people, I have a pretty extensive questionnaire, and one of the questions is, do you have a support system? Because I've had more than one client who I am their only support system in the journey of whatever they've come to me for, whether it's training, nutrition. Usually there's some sort of body composition or pain component to that. And living an optimal life to me is not being alone in that. And if I'm right now the only other part of that equation for somebody, thank you, right? We are not meant to go this alone. And finding what I think brings people peace of mind and happiness and wanting to get up the next day, which isn't always the case. This suddenly just got very deep, but this is kind of how I operate.
And I would imagine that you've had to build tremendous trust with your clients to be able to even approach them and say, hey, I think you could benefit from
absolutely,
going to see somebody.
Yeah. It's definitely not something that I'm looking at a questionnaire and I can see things coming pretty quickly, especially with certain answers that may be given or conversations that get had. But I definitely need to make sure and it's usually given what they'll end up sharing with me, lets me know where they're at with being comfortable with me and trusting me with that information. And I really, really try, not only in my business life, but in my personal life and anyone I meet, to create a space that feels very safe and trusting as quickly as possible, just so people can be more of themselves as quickly as possible, because not everyone's comfortable with that. And it allows me from a professional standpoint, it allows me to help them better.
Do you think you do that in some ways? Earlier I mentioned that you always seem to be very positive and you don't get caught up in a lot of the negative, aspect that can come on, like whether it's social media or even, in person, you don't get caught up in that negative side of things. So that in some ways builds a instant trust factor to people that.
I probably a little bit. I definitely have opinions on, things that are going on. And in all fairness, my business page is my business page. So I'm not going to go down certain rabbit holes, but I try my best to control the controllable, and that is my physical self, and that is it. And learning to understand more about the things that are going on that may be bothering me or that I just find interesting is important. But spending tons of time stressing myself out about something I can't actually do anything about, or if it's that serious to me, finding out what I can do, where would my voice be heard? Who can I reach out to? Who can I contact to contribute to trying to change something instead of, for all sense and purposes, just bitching about it. Right.
Yeah, so taking action versus just
we're
worrying or stressing or whatever it might be.
There's so much easy input for stress these days. I mean, with our phones, with the world in general right now, and like all the ways, it's easy.
When we were talking about that a little bit before we hit record is, when it comes to recovery, I feel like when people are on social media or whatever it is, all we hear is you got to grind, you got to hustle, you have to. And I fall into this trap, at times where if I'm not up at 5 a.m., I'm like, somebody's getting ahead of me.
Yeah.
And you almost have to be reminded to prioritize recovery.
Yeah.
And like we were talking about earlier, I think sometimes people, when they hear recovery, they're thinking pro athletes or people that are in the gym 5 days a week or whatever it might be. But I even see, where I think like a stay-at-home mom that is busting her butt, and
that shit is no joke.
Yes, I watch my wife do it. I will tell you right now, I could not do it.
24/7. You don't get a break. Whether it's a mom or a dad, whoever this, especially the soul. I mean, my dad was a single parent for the bulk of my life. Like, being a parent, props to every parent, whether you're the main person or you split it pretty evenly or whatever. There's no off, right? You don't get to, it's 5 p.m. Great. The day is over. The work day might be over, right? But the mom day isn't over. The dad day isn't over. And
then even, like once the kids go to bed or once your work's done, then the next thing you know, we're picking up our phones, scrolling through social media or looking at emails. So we're still not shut off. We may have something that triggers us there or an email that we feel like we have to respond to. It's very hard. At least I found it very hard. And I know a lot of other people do too, to truly be able to just sit there and work on recovery. What are some, like, when you're working with your clients, what are some things that you do with them to get them to focus on the recovery before it becomes too late, whether it's physical or emotional or mental? Our body gives us a lot of warning signs.
Yes. And they're easy to ignore until they punch us in the gut. Cause it's I'm going to equate it actually to, since I do nutrition as well, you can I just get a little bloated when I eat that. Okay, well, a little bit of bloated shouldn't happen either. A lot of bloated, you pay more attention to. Explosive diarrhea, you pay more attention to, right? Oh my God, I broke out in a rash. You think I'm being funny, but sadly I'm being serious. That's when people pay attention, right? But when
you'll see people eat something and they'll get wheezy or they'll start have a tickle in their throat or something from.
And if it's not a big deal, they just kind of whatever, not that big of a deal. Well, but if that's happening regularly, it now becomes chronically not a big deal. That accumulates ultimately into a big deal often. And it's the same thing with recovery. And it'll always, depending on the client and where they're at and what they're open to, and, conversations are always had. This is never me telling them what to do. This is me trying to, as intelligently as possible, based on where we're at together in this relationship, of find what seems realistic. And I'll ask, it's not I think you should do this. It's, do you think this is doable? Not, you will try. Is it doable? because that's where we want to start. And often it's something as simple as when you get into bed, since we're already laying down and hopefully unwinding, even though possibly our phone is in front of our face. When all of that's done, when you've done all the stuff that you're going to do in your bed, whatever that is, whether or not it should be happening, when you're done, I just want you to take 3 really deep breaths, and we'll go over what those breaths look like and should feel like and where parts of your body should move. Like, it's often that simple. I even had a client where his life was so crazy that happened on a bathroom break in a stall at work. That was his reality. And the cool thing was it actually made a really big difference for him. And he recognized how positively it was impacting the rest of his day, that on his own, he started doing it again when he got home. So it's often something very small.
And do you find most times it's something like, if you can get somebody to consistently do something very small, you know, it's easy for us to set lofty goals and want to go from 0 to 100 by tomorrow morning. But do you find, like, if you can get them to just do one small task consistently, that then all of a sudden other things in their life start to fall in line?
Yes. I mean, and that's often how it works. And it's not, at the end of the day, consistency is king, right? Whether it's moving us towards what we want or away, whatever we're doing consistently is going to contribute more. And picking tons of things, picking the hardest thing isn't generally where we want to start. All of those things ultimately can be reached, but finding the lowest hanging fruit, right? Finding what can you 100% tell me you will do right now. And maybe it's not daily, but maybe it's 3 times a week. Maybe it's once a week. Like, again, like, everyone's different with not only what they're able to do, but what they're willing to do. And the nice thing is, a tiny change consistently showing a little bit of success is very powerful. So it often will then lead to more, whether it's more frequency of the thing. And again, more is not always better. I say that loosely, but maybe it's something that the goal is ultimately to be doing it daily, and they're starting with twice a week. And even just from the twice a week, which seemed to them like nothing, which is often the case, it's hard to wrap our brain around something so little making a difference. But if you're consistently doing it, it'll add up. And then it becomes a little more natural, becomes a little more routine. So, okay, I can do that on Wednesdays also, right? It's 2 minutes out of my day. Sure. Right. And then it kind of snowballs in a good way. And
through this process, do you ever, and I know it's not your specialty, but do you ever like work with people on their time management? Because I know a lot of times, well, you know, you'll hear people say, I don't have time for that.
It's funny.
But meanwhile, a conversation on Netflix will come up and they're like, oh yeah, I've already watched that entire series.
It's funny you say that. I literally, and in all fairness, this client does have a crazy life and a lot going on. However, he was just saying that. I'm like, this is going to seem a little extreme, but I would recommend you literally, from the time you wake up until the time you go to bed, log pretty much every minute of your day, because I promise you will find some time in there somewhere that can probably be utilized differently. I'm not saying a lot, but often, I mean, the amount of time we're scrolling here, and I do, right? I mean, granted.
Oh, I know I do.
Dogs and nature and, you know, things that make me happy, but still, you know, it's productive in the sense that it's making me feel good, but I could probably be reading my book, right? There's usually time in the day somewhere. And I'm not saying that you should never watch television, but if someone's coming to me saying this is my goal, right? And I'll also ask, what do you think a realistic time frame is? Because it's usually not, right? Like, oh, I want to lose 60 pounds in like 4 weeks. I'm like, all right, so let's have a conversation about that. But there's, right. But there's usually some time, and it doesn't even have to be that anything stops. It's just certain windows get more productive. Like if, say, you're like, okay, I need to program for my client. If my phone is next to me, the likelihood of me periodically going to it, even if it doesn't amount to a lot of time, that's suddenly time pulled away from me designing my program that should only take this amount of time for this client. Suddenly it took that plus 40 extra minutes, right? And so...
And it's quite a rabbit hole. We can go, just picking up your phone to look at one text.
Totally. And it's,
at least for me, the next thing you know, I'm on Instagram, then I'll check this and I'll check that.
And it's not, I'm not even saying some of that's bad. Like the amount of communication I have through Instagram is a lot. So, I text certain people, but not everyone has my number. So a lot of conversations, whether it's professional or just kind of has become friendship or sharing of memes, as you know, I do that. A lot of people on the receiving end of that. So it's not necessarily bad things, but at the end of the day, at least some of it's probably time that could be spent better somewhere else that you're saying you don't have. Right. And so I literally actually just told this client, I'm like, he's like, you're right. I was like, I had this day planner and it was working well and I don't have it anymore. I'm like, sounds like now is a good time to get another one, because he was way more effective with his time when he had it. And it can seem silly to have to log everything in terms of like when you're doing things, but if that helps you stick to it so you get it all done. And what fell off on him was his nutrition as a result of this and the training program. And he's a military guy and he's got a test that he needs to pass. And there's a lot of rehab work that we're doing. And I'm like, our work is not what needs to be stopping right now with this test happening. Right. Yeah. And so it's interesting. And again, like he also had just tons of stuff going on, but he literally didn't have time to waste in his day anywhere. And what he was choosing to pull out was the stuff that at least short term was actually more important, because this test has a date, right? Getting to a certain level of fitness or whatever beyond that is on his time, but this test he has no control over. Physically, he has to be able to do it, right? So literally, I was like, every minute of your day, look at it. Where can you find 5 minutes? Where can you find? I told him, I'm like, I'm going to give you a 2-day program. 4 is ridiculous right now. I'm going to put this all into 2 days for you, because there's no way 4 is happening, right? So, and adjusting, and I think it's hard. It's kind of related to this, is just because something worked really well for us before doesn't mean it still will now. It might, but it might not. It might later. It might not right now. Whether it's a recovery plan, whether it's nutrition, whether it's how we organize our day, everything changes around us. And sometimes that means what we're doing has to change to accommodate that so we can still get our end result, whatever that may be. And recovery for him, breath work has been part of it. And it wasn't until he was limping that he got back to doing certain things. And that's what I hate. I hate when it gets that bad for somebody, that it's forced, right? I don't want you to be that not well off, that you have no choice but to do the things you were supposed to be doing, that you told yourself you wanted to do, right? Like I don't want that for anybody. I want to get ahead of it, whatever it is.
And do you ever have clients that, obviously say one thing, but their actions don't back it up, that you have to eventually just...
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to say fire, but just, maybe say this isn't the right fit because you're pouring your heart and soul into trying to help them and you're not seeing... it's not, and I realize they're paying you and all that stuff, but they're not reciprocating the effort.
No, thankfully, very rarely. Usually conversations are had to address it in a way. And again, like, I'm not going to be a jerk about it. I want this person to succeed. And often what it really comes down to is what they want to be able to do, but what they're actually willing to do are not the same thing. And that's okay. It's like, I want to meet somebody where they are, but they need to meet themselves where they actually are. And there's no right or wrong to that. Like the idea of, and that's why I said, I don't want to know what you're going to try to do. I want to know what you can do right now. And if that's, I can have 5 sips of water and that's the only thing that can change right now. Okay. Yeah. It's going to be a really slow process, but but like setting expectations is really important because I want my clients to do well, but I want my clients to do well because I want them to do well for them. Right. And I don't want them to think they're failing. I don't want them to think they can't do these things. It's just often that we tell ourselves it has to be this. And there's no way that's going to be what it is. Right. Like I just had this conversation the other day. I'm like, I have no problem picking something really easy. I'm like, if you nail it, I will change your program for next week, even though it's a 4-week thing. This is nutrition. I'm like, if this happens based on everything, conversations, I'm like, we'll change it. But I'd rather you win really quickly with something easy because that makes you feel better. And we know that's an easy one. And then we'll add to it. But often people want to think they're going to do all of these things. And rarely is that the case. And that's where, like, again, for anyone who's a client, I don't apologize for the length of my questionnaire, but there's a reason for it. And there's even usually some follow-up questions based on those answers. And that's often what a lot of that is, because we're an impatient culture, right? We want everything yesterday. We want the quick fix. Rarely is anyone comes to me for a quick fix. Sometimes with my treatment stuff, the MPS, sometimes it's a quick fix, but.
And I want to get into the MPS, but one more question on that is, I'd imagine a lot of times, like by the time they come to you, like you said, if they're limping or, they're X number of pounds overweight, it's something that has been building for months and years for them to get to that point. But like you said, we're a quick fix society. So, for example, my knee's been bothering me for 2 years, but I want it to be better by tomorrow afternoon.
Yeah, right. I have this race, right? Yeah. And there's a lot of conversations about that. And nothing I do with anybody, I'll say this a lot around nutrition, but with any of it, like, it's never about perfection. It's about better, right? If you're doing something better than you were before, that adds up. If you're better most of the time, that adds up. Life happens, right? And when people, especially when it comes to body comp, think, well, how long will it take me to lose fill in the blank of, the weight somebody wants to lose? I'm like, you're going to hate my answer because it depends is absolutely the answer to that. But even if the nutrition is on point, even if the training is on point, your sleep needs to be on point, your stress management needs to be on point. I don't know how much you're going to be traveling. You don't know how much you're going to be traveling. Life happens, right? You can plan as much as you want. And then there's all the things that happen that aren't part of that plan. And so many things change the timeline. And the more I think we can not use it as an excuse, but recognize the reality of that factoring in so that, sure, we can have a goal. And sometimes there is a date attached to something. The amount of progress is dependent largely on what you're able to do. And certain things, like if you're sleeping like shit and no one can figure out why, that's a reality. And that also becomes a priority, right? So it's, there are many layers.
And that's, I've had people tell me that, you're almost wasting money if you're taking supplements, but your sleep's not on point, because that is like the foundation. And I realize, like, if you are a parent of a young one, your 6-month-old probably isn't going to care that you need 8 hours of sleep.
No.
And it's, and you have to work, everything. So it's not always feasible.
And that's where,
But like the one, Oh, I was just going to say the one thing that I've noticed that's been a big help is when it comes to nutrition, it's such a complicated field that you really need to, and I know not everybody's going to go out and hire a nutrition coach, but everybody, you can kind of keep a log because it's so individualized what will work for some people and others.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know I have a friend that's a trainer, and he'll always say that people ask, so what are you eating right now? And he's like, that's irrelevant to your goals. He said, because I have different stress levels, different sleep levels. You know, I carry a different amount of muscle than you do, whether it's less or more, whatever it might be. He's like, what I'm eating is irrelevant to what you should be eating. He said outside of, obviously healthy food choices, but when it comes to like, how many calories, carbs, fats, protein, all that stuff, he said it's really individualized.
It's really, especially this day and age, especially with social media and everything and just Googling anything. But at the end of the day, when it comes to nutrition, because I'll get people like, well, how do you make your clients eat? I'm like, first of all, I don't make anyone do anything. It's like, this is all a group effort. But it's about, again, what's realistic for that person. Like, I have clients who, clean is a relative word, but let's just say they're super, super clean. And then I have clients who are kind of, and I have some who aren't, but it's better than what was going on. And at the end of the day, what I'm going to recommend for them, yes, is based on what they're trying to do, but it's 100% based on what they're actually going to do, right? And the reality of that and what's sustainable. The stricter we get with our nutrition in whatever direction you want to go with that, the less likely we are to stick with it. The number of clients over the course of my professional career that have been like, oh yeah, well, I know what I have to do when I did that. I'm like, but you stopped doing it at some point, clearly, right? We're here. And it's,
yeah,
people don't recognize that. They're like, it worked really well. I'm like, but did it? Like, it worked really well for the 30 days you did it. It worked really well for the 3-month challenge you did it. But was it actually something that is a sustainable way for you to eat for your life, for the fact that you have 3 kids, for the fact that you go out every weekend? And I'm not saying not to do that. Like, that has to get factored in, right? Like, I want you to enjoy what you eat. I want you to enjoy the time you spend with your friends and family. Relationships largely are what life is about to me. And I think a lot of people I work with would agree with that. Yet, somehow letting other things dictate that ability to interact with them in the way we actually want to kind of gets pushed aside temporarily. So quick progress can be made and then it backfires, right? And for me, it's about a sustainable way to eat. And if that means McDonald's is in the mix, if we've cleaned things up and McDonald's is still in the mix and you're feeling better and your labs are coming back better, there's your reality of a sustainable way to eat, right? Maybe it's paleo, maybe it's everything, whatever. Like, I don't have a way. I have a way that a client can do long term. And again, that may even change because our lives change, but I want you to feel well. I want your blood work to come back. I want your tests to be good. I want you to be healthy from the inside out. I want you to wake up physically not hurting as much as possible, right? I want you to do the things you want to do with your family. And so that's how I guide training nutrition with anybody. It's so specific to them and their life. And so there's a lot of long-winded answer. There's a lot of conversation. So we're both really on the same page about what's going to be happening. And there's no wrong or right answer to this. I just want the honest one because that's what we're going to.
Well, and does that allow you to kind of set expectations? If this person says, hey, I enjoy going out every Friday night and I'm going to have a few beers with the guys or a few drinks with the women.
Absolutely.
Say I'll factor that in. It may delay your progress by X amount of time, but if you're happier doing that and you're okay with that, then, by all means 100%. Do it.
100%. Obviously there's limits to this. If someone's like every night I want to, okay, well, maybe I'm not the person that you want to working with. But yes, like that's my goal with clients is I want them to enjoy their life and still have success with why they've come to me. 100%.
Okay, so shifting gears, you mentioned it before. Let's move over a little bit more like the physical side, like the MPS that you do.
Yeah, so microcurrent point stimulation.
Okay, I was going to say, first of all, what is it?
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. It's a non-invasive recovery tool in my world. In other worlds, it's a pain therapy, a non-invasive pain therapy. Technically, the devices are TENS units, but as you've seen, very different than what most people kind of think TENS. They think the pads that get slapped on and forces contraction in a muscle. Not better, worse, just different. So mine there's two, and depending on what I'm doing, I'll use one or two. But it comes to a fine point because a lot of protocols will follow acupuncture points. So that lets me be very specific as to where I'm going, especially because I am not an acupuncturist. So I have my little booklet and I follow specific protocols for certain things. The big kind of umbrella of what it does to allow addressing pain is it largely, though not only, but largely downregulates our sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight, which is what we're all like fired up on, and upregulates our parasympathetic, which is our flight or our rest, digest, recover, repair, right? Where we all need way more time. Myself included, even though my life isn't crazy and stressful. It's my nervous system still gets fired up from life. So if we're sympathetically upregulated, our body doesn't care about healing. It cares about not dying. I'm being somewhat dramatic, but it's pretty much kind of what it comes down to. So we've got to quiet that part of the nervous system down. Both parts are necessary, 100%. But we're very chronically upregulated in the fight or flight these days with everything. Something as simple as the sounds and the vibrations, all the things like this, I don't even care. The sounds, the vibrations telling us we have information coming in. Like I encourage all of my clients to silence their phones, to turn off vibration. You're going to look. You're not going to go 30 minutes and not look.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but can't even like healthy things be stressors, like even training or working out or, obviously it's healthy and it's a good stress sometimes.
When it is, right? And that's the thing. So yes, those are kind of the short-term good stressors, assuming we're able to recover from it, right? But say somebody is just so fried, they've been traveling, they're exhausted, they haven't slept well. Maybe nutrition's been off or maybe not, but they're just exhausted. Going and having a hard workout because it's a good thing for our body isn't the best choice then, right? And so and not to say that you can't train, but what that looks like should be different because your body isn't going to recover well from going hard, right? And I think that's a very I don't want to say underbelieved, but we kind of want to ignore that because physically, if we feel like we can do something, it's easy to tell ourselves it's fine. If I can do it, why shouldn't I? If you're waking up feeling like you got hit by a truck from something that shouldn't have done that, that's a big red flag, right? If you're not sleeping well, internally things aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing to recover, even if it's just from the day, right? And so
how much value do you put into like wearables like the Whoop strap or like the Oura ring to measure some of that?
I think when it comes to sleep, from what I'm hearing still, the Oura ring tends to be the most accurate regardless of that. If you're not going to actually do anything with the information, it's pointless. if you're actually going to change behaviors based on what it's telling you, then it becomes more important. If you know you're getting like 6 hours of sleep, that's what you normally do, and you feel fine, and you're using some sort of trackable device, and it's telling you today's not the day you go hard, even if you kind of feel good, that's tricky. But if you're actually going to listen to it, then it's probably a better thing. I mean,
do you ever notice where it like stresses people out because
yeah, for sure,
they're like, I have to get to sleep by this certain time, and if I don't,
it's
and it actually works in reverse?
Yeah, yes and no. Like for some people, it's also kind of this honeymoon stage where they're all about it. They're listening, they're doing the things because it's new and it's cool. And what's cool often is, even for things like steps, people have convinced themselves they can't do those things any differently. Yet suddenly this watch or this ring magically convinces them otherwise. Fine. I don't care what makes the good stuff happen if it happens. But yes, if you then are obsessing and it's now this kind of vicious cycle of, oh my God, I didn't get this, I have to, now it's moving in the wrong direction. And I don't see tons of that. Often I'll just see that it's kind of a short-lived excitement about something and paying attention to it. Even if they're listening and getting results, it takes a while for actual behaviors to change. And so if they kind of bail on it too soon, it doesn't end up kind of serving the long-term purpose necessarily. But again, for some people, it's great. I mean, I track things, I look at things. Sometimes it's more just out of curiosity to see what that amounted to my body based on how I perceived it to feel. So I think ultimately, if you're going to use that information in a way that's productive for you, yes, it's a good thing. If you're not, and especially if it's somehow going to create this negatively obsessive situation, or just add stress to what we already know is probably more stress than you need anyway, then no. I mean, depends is going to be the answer for everything. But I think they can be great. I think they can be great, especially for people who kind of listen to them. The Oura Ring, again, seems to be the most accurate for sleep stuff from what I'm finding. And it's cool because people are just understanding their bodies a little bit better who choose to.
Well, it's interesting because I sleep with an Oura Ring, and typically if I'm going to get sick, about a night or two before, my body temp will go up to like 1 to 1.5 degrees above normal. And it's all, knock on wood, I don't get sick very often, but when I do, I've had like a warning that your body is, and it at least gives me a chance to be a little more proactive, to like double down on whether it be vitamin D, zinc, whatever the I think I'm coming down with or whatever. And sometimes it's just, I need to make sure and get plenty of sleep, like if I've been traveling.
Yeah.
I know like at the SHOT Show last year, I started noticing it, and and it's funny how uncanny it is about kind of predicting that.
You're not the only
and then
person that with the Oura Ring.
Yeah, and then once I start seeing it come down, like in the morning, I'm like, okay, I should start feeling better. And I don't know if it's placebo effect or what, but it seems to work.
Yeah, I mean, it's giving you physiological feedback, right? And what it's telling you is your immune system's been compromised enough that your body's having a hard time doing what it needs to do well, right? And if you choose to listen to it, which you do, that's awesome. The challenge is often we don't, because we're like, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. Right?
And sometimes, like for traveling, we're at an event, we're like, oh, I'll have to sleep and
it's tricky.
Get back on track when I get home.
Yeah. And again, like that's just reality sometimes, right? When you go to these events, I mean, even when I go to Summer Strong, I mean, technically it's a business thing for me, but it's like fun, right? I'm hanging out with all my friends. I'm meeting new people. I'm learning about other stuff I don't know things about as well. I'm always underslept. I mean, there's just, sometimes it's worth it. But your average day of the week, of the month, that should not be the case, right? There's always going to be those every once in a whiles. And it's one thing, but if you're choosing to ignore those signs, whether it's from something or not, that are kind of the daily, it's going to catch up to you. Where we only will progress as well as we recover. And that's a hard thing to wrap our brains around these days.
And it is, and I think because we see it on social media, or we hear that, even like, if it's an off day where I'm not training and I go online and I'll watch, scroll through my feed and people are in the gym, I'm like, well, I should probably go do something.
Well, maybe, but what that looks like doesn't necessarily need to be what they're doing.
Correct. And, and I'll still try to get movement in or something, but, it's easy to get wrapped up into that. And you get into that comparison mode where, well, that person's doing this. And
it's just so funny because even though we know, especially just kind of going down the social media rabbit hole, we know that we're only seeing little bits and pieces of everybody's life, yet somehow we kind of forget that and play out the rest of their day and the rest of their life based on that little snip that has either accurately or inaccurately been shared, right?
And it could be a video from a week ago. They could be on vacation laying on a beach. We don't know.
And I think it's tricky. And I mean, coming back to stress, I mean, I've actually had this conversation somewhat recently with somebody. When it comes to social media, what we choose to be exposed to is up to us, right? Whether it's because we get on or who we follow. If you're following an account, and even if you're getting some good stuff out of it, if you're also getting consistently negative feelings out of it in whatever way, probably not a good account to be following. Stuff to be like, oh, I can improve upon myself because of this is one thing, but feeling like shit from this account on a regular basis, feeling less than on a regular basis because of this account, do not follow that account. Like it happens all the time and we kind of don't recognize it, especially if there's also value in there somewhere.
That falls into something that you said earlier of, control what you can control. You can control hitting unfollow.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, control the controllable, right? And that's literally just us. And even that's not always easy. But we definitely those are, and again, it's hard, I think, when you are genuinely getting something positive from, we'll say this account, but whomever, whatever, right, out in your life. When you're getting good from it, it's easy to rationalize keeping it. But if you're equally, or even worse, more so getting negative from it on a regular basis, that shouldn't win. And
do you see that people even do that? I think they do in real life. Take social media out of it. They'll surround themselves with certain people that, whether they gossip, whatever it might be. And
yes,
and then they'll, they come home and they're stressed out or they're whatever.
Yeah, it's funny you say this. It's funny. This is all literally all conversations I've been having the last few days. I was just chatting with someone the other day, and so in my story, I don't get tons of engagement, and that's okay. I pose the question. I'm like, how is everyone doing? Truly. I'm not someone who asks that just to be fluffy. I'm not that person. If I'm asking, I'm genuinely caring and wanting to know. And again, I also know that for some people, they don't have other people in their life. Not that I can be that person to everybody, but sometimes just having a conversation can be helpful. And based off of one of the responses, it turned into this whole conversation. which led to me saying to this person, regardless of the type of relationship you have with a human, your life should be better because they're in it. If it's not, it's probably a good time to reevaluate that relationship. And it's really easy, I think, especially if you have a history with somebody, to feel like you owe them the friendship still, even if they're clearly negatively impacting your life right now. Even if at one point they were great, if they're now consistently negatively impacting your life, why is that a good thing? Why is that being allowed? And again, maybe it's just a break and a conversation, and maybe that friendship goes back to the type or relationship that it's supposed to be. But our lives should be better because of the people we allow into it. And it's hard. That is really hard. Those are hard conversations to have. But I find myself having those types of conversations with clients, again, based on what they're sharing with me. And it usually somehow segues, usually more so because of a food situation than a training situation. But people in your life should be making it better. And again, stress and arguments happen, but overall.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, even the best marriages or whatever.
Totally. And they take work.
You get in fights with your kids. That doesn't mean that you're
absolutely.
Kicking your kids to the curb.
Relationships take work, but that shouldn't be an uphill battle. And that with everything, like your life should be better because these things are in it.
And that's the one thing it seems like is a common theme with you, is that you're always trying to serve or help people. Even with your question online of how are you doing, and not trying to create engagement, because
right.
You're wanting to increase your followers or anything like that. But truly, how are you doing? Have you always been that way, or is that something that has evolved as you've gotten older?
I think I've always been a pretty happy person. And it's funny, a couple of years ago, I actually had a friend ask me, he's like, so-and-so and I were talking. I'm like, what? Like, yeah, we were wondering if you were like always this nice and this like caring and happy. And because they're not like me. And no one's like anyone else, right? But yes, like I recognize that I am probably, and I've had really shitty things happen in my life. Like,
well, and that's where I was going to, and I don't know, if you have time, I'd like to go there, because sure. I've heard you talk about this, that you lost your mom when you were 4. Is that right? Yeah. So
I lost my mom when I was 4. She died in a car accident. And so my dad was really, he was flying solo. There were, some girlfriends. My dad was always had it with the ladies. I don't know what that was about, but my dad was great. And the older I get, I hear more stories. I was visiting my brother back east, and he was just telling me a story that I had no clue about. And my dad was just like so kind and so loving and so supportive, but was also a total badass. And I had like no idea. It was like, what? My dad was awesome. But yeah, so like, she died when I was 4, and my dad was raising my brother, and myself, and by himself, and he was a single parent. And so like, I get the single parent thing, like it is not easy. And his priority for us was education. And so that's kind of where, he put his money towards that, and he worked. He was a professor. He taught biology and botany. My name is a plant. My middle name is a flower, Zamia sunflower. We're like, where are you from? I'm like, yeah, it's not that. But then he died. Yeah, right. But and then he died when I was 29. He had a massive heart attack. And so at 29, I had neither of my parents alive anymore. And I was really close to my grandfather and my grandmother, and they had passed. My grandmother actually passed shortly after my dad. And that was a whole other thing, because I became the person taking care of her, and I had friends die. Like, I've had a lot of death in my life, and grateful that I am wired the way I am wired, because to a certain extent for me, death is very black and white, in the sense that for whatever reason, I don't go down the why rabbit hole. It's no answer I can come up with is going to make me feel any better about that person being gone. It's not going to change it. It sucks. I cried so much when my dad died. I mean, that was by far the worst moment of my life, was finding that out. The whole day didn't suck. Everything up before that was fine. So, but with all the death that I've had, what I have found, ironically, given my profession is all about helping people be alive and have a better quality of life, I almost felt like there was this dichotomy of this other purpose for me of helping people with death, because I had experienced so much of it. And I found that as my friends started losing people, I had already lost a bunch of people. So I'd gone through this and experienced it. And not that I can make it easy, but I found that because I had experienced it, whether this is right or wrong, I felt like it kind of gave me the right, if you will, or the allowance to say certain things that people don't tend to say when somebody loses someone. It's usually, I'm so sorry for your loss. It'll be okay. In time, this will feel, that's all great, but you don't fucking care about any of that when it happens. Like, it's awful, right? It fucking sucks. And sorry, I'm assuming I can swear on your podcast.
No, you're good. You're good.
Some people are going to be like, oh my God, you swear? Like, people think I don't. Major potty mouth. House of Men. I grew up in House of Men. But like, I would say those things, and it was like, and what I, ironically, again, I just had this conversation with someone else. I was like, it's awful. It sucks. Feel all of the things you're going to feel. Allow yourself to. You're not going to like some of them, but please allow yourself to the best of your ability to feel all of those things and move through that in whatever way you are able to. Everyone's different with how they move through grief. And loss is hard. It's finite, right? In one way, at least. And again, like, I think I'm wired a certain way that I could easily kind of live in all of that loss, but I don't operate that way.
Well, and I would almost say that people that say that you're always happy and all this probably assume, well, she's never really had to go through something difficult, that'll change once she has to go through this. But I know you had gone through, a bunch of loss, and you had told me before that, to you, death had almost become black and white.
In one way, and obviously, yeah.
Yes. And I know for me too, that I have found is it's never like a particular day or like something. It'll be like a song or, something that out of nowhere, I could be perfectly happy.
Totally.
And something will just trigger
that connection.
And it may last.
Yeah.
Yes. And it'll last like 5 or 10 minutes, maybe longer, maybe less. And then I can go right back to what I was doing. But at least for me, and I'm never going to tell anybody how to handle it, but that has allowed me to kind of, instead of bottling those emotions
Absolutely. And
I let them come and go as they hit me.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of where I'm going with that when I say that to people. And it's easy, especially if you feel like you're the person in your family who has to be tough and stoic and I need to be the strong person. And we're human. We are human. And I think what's beautiful about those moments where like you're genuinely good and then like that, it feels like the same day. What's beautiful to me about that, not to say it also isn't brutally hard at the same time, but, and this is what I just was constantly reminding myself when my dad passed, is I'm like, it hurts so much because of how good that relationship was. And for me, that was an accurate statement. That might not be the case universally, but that helped me with that pain and with that, I mean, I cried whenever I needed to cry. I told my colleagues, I was back at work a week later. I kind of had to be. And for me, it sat well, but I told them, I was like, I'm going to cry at work. Don't worry about it. It's okay. This is why. Like, I'm not someone who, like, you don't need to know my business. I mean, obviously not everything, but I was like, when I left work that day, I was like, please tell them what happened so they know. Like, this isn't a secret. I want them to know why I suddenly left, especially because that's not me. And I don't know how many months, like my drive home from work, I'd actually be okay at work. And the second I got in my car and I wasn't distracted, floodgates would open and I'd cry all the way home. I'd walk in and my roommate, I was like, I'll be back down when I'm done, and I let him. I'm like, whew, okay, and I sat with all of that whenever I needed to. And that's hard, and it's uncomfortable. But that's the human part. And I was so fortunate to have 29 years with an amazing father who just loved me unconditionally. And he wasn't perfect, but he loved me and loved my brother and supported us and just wanted us to be happy and self-sufficient. And
it sounds, I mean, like you said, being a single parent, two parents at home is not easy. Being a single parent is, obviously exponentially harder, but for him to be able to build that relationship with you, but two different things you said there that kind of gives, I think, people a glimpse into how you think is when it happened, you focused on all the good times you had with your dad.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't
and
not,
you were given 29 years to be with him, where so many people, they look at it from the other side of, I only had him for 29 years.
Yeah. And I mean,
and I know it's basically saying the same thing, but it's such just a twist of words that I think we run into so many times in life.
Yeah. And I think it's important to recognize that, like, I wasn't there the day he died in terms of that mindset necessarily. Where I did get to quickly, it took me a while to kind of, I was sad. You're grieving there's always a sadness to it, but it changes.
Absolutely.
It changes over time, generally. But it's never gone, right? That void is never filled, even though it's the order of events. Like parents, you lose your parents, right? Mine just came a lot sooner. And even with some other friends that had passed, but especially when my dad passed, what I told myself and then was able to say to other people when they lost somebody is, they always say, don't let it be in vain. Don't let it be in vain. I don't say that. What I say is, I'm like, and I have to remind myself of this, live my life differently because of this. Right? Like, if I ever wasn't doing something that this kind of clarified should be happening or part of my life, live differently because of that, right? Life is short. And I think, and I will say, I mean, granted, my dad, I love you flowed in my house. That was not something that wasn't said. I was used to that. We hugged, like we were a very affectionate family, Thankfully, my teenage nephews are still all about hugging me, and they're like full on teenagers, but I'm still cool as Zamia. But I think it's how do I say this? It's important to let yourself feel all the things you feel for as long as you need to feel them. Right. And if that has to be completely in private, that's fine. Like, that doesn't mean you have to. I'm not afraid to cry around people. I realize not everyone is like that. But it's important to let yourself go through that. And that it looks different for everybody. And life is short. Right. And I think because I'm guessing, I mean, again, I don't totally know the answer to this. I clearly am wired a certain way. I get that. I've got depression on both sides of my family, and it was kind of like two wrongs made a right. Like, none of it. It's I joke, but like,
Yeah, I'm saying I'm not laughing at the depression. I'm laughing at the whole.
Yeah.
Once again, your positive spin of two wrongs made a right.
It's almost like I feel like have been put together the way I've been put together, so I can do what I do and not be that person to everybody, because I can't, but like the darkness in other people, the bad stuff, if you want, that people may have done, like it never scares me to go there with somebody. And I mean, I've definitely had people be like, oh, I'm too dark for you. I'm like, first of all, you don't get to decide that. But I'm like, I don't seem to be negatively impacted or drained. Even like my profession, people get drained in this industry all the time. I don't. For whatever reason, it's like I have this force field around me, and I don't feel the energy suck when I work with clients. When I'm treating, it's the opposite. Like I am so energized when I'm working on people, when I'm doing MPS. And I think it's also why, me being the way I am, I know how I am. I don't say that lightly, and I'm very grateful, especially because it's allowed me. So my pro bono population with the MPS are first responders, active military, and veterans. And especially with the veterans, because of all of those things I just said, I have thankfully found that it has very quickly created a space with that community when I've worked with them one-on-one in private, that they trust me and feel safe with me, and quickly realize that it doesn't make me uncomfortable when they start sharing stuff, which lets me help more in the session.
And do you feel like it's a total, mind, body, like when those guys are coming to you with their injuries, obviously they're physical injuries, but do you think when they're able to express that emotional side, get their body, it's like a total package almost.
Absolutely.
That helps them properly, or helps them start on that path towards healing.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm not going to say I'm like this miracle person for them, but I have definitely had on more than one occasion, and I'm not even just going to say male, like men and women, when you are in that community, you are designed to be a certain way. Right? You are tough as shit. You got to do the things that we can't do, we don't want to do, that has to be done. You have to have a certain mindset to survive what has to be done in that setting, right? And you see things and you do things that have to be done, that have to be seen, and they're awful, right? But you have to, and you also have to shut things off in order to do that. And it's getting better, but there's obviously still this weakness, I air quote that, associated with feelings that rightfully are actually attached to that, but can't be dealt with then, right? And the loss of a limb, the loss of a human, the loss of many humans, whether or not it was at your own hand or your brother or sister next to you. That is heavy. That is heavy, heavy, heavy shit. And the tears that happen, not always, but again, I always want anybody, this is not only my pro bono population, but anyone who comes into my table, physical pain will manifest itself from other stuff often. Obviously, there's also because it's physical stuff. But it is all very connected. And the amount of tears that I've seen with the veterans that I've worked on has been so beautiful, because they have felt safe enough, and I'm going to start crying right now. They have felt safe enough and trusted that space that I've been able to provide, not only in helping the physical pain, but let them know that it doesn't, I'm sharing the story, but I'm not obviously going to tell anyone's story, that they've never cried in front of people. I had someone who's like, I had never even told my wife this. And it was a war thing. And clearly it needed to be said. Like the amount that some of the pain physical pain we were working on, that shifted with the treatment and him telling me that. As woo-woo as you want to may say it is, I don't fucking care. Like, if someone feels better, they feel better. And that's all that matters to me. But it's been so beautiful being able to connect with that population. And again, if they don't get on my table, that's a different story. But if they get to the point where they get on my table, I'm pretty confident that things will be different in some capacity. Not only in the obvious ways, but especially for that community, even first responders. I got a fire station that I was working with for a while, and, a lot of similar stuff. And I'm a civilian, obviously, but I get them a little bit more because of how much interaction I've had with them and just talking with my friends who are in those industries. So when we start to have conversations like, oh, you get it. And I'm like, more than the average person might at this point, because of how much people have shared with me. And so that opens up trust.
And do you think you open doors for them to the point that once they start sharing something with you, they see the benefits of being able to share that, whether it's with you or other people, but it kind of opens the door just for them to start sharing and not thinking they have to go at it alone or figure everything out on their own?
Yeah. I mean, I think sometimes, yes, that has been very clear, especially with follow-up stuff and conversations that they've had with me. I don't always know. I hope. And in the very least, they know it's an option, and that those human beings who genuinely just care about their well-being, and there's no judgment. And that's a big part of it. Like, and the feedback I get are like, you're not judging me. I'm like, I have no business judging you, and I don't want to judge you. I want to understand you. And this is the same with just my clients, my nutrition clients, my training clients. I'm like, I want to understand you the best I can so I can help the best I can. I'm limited, but the more I know you and you trust me and I understand you, the more I can help. And that's what it comes down to.
And I know, like, for me personally, the more that I learn to share things with other people, the more you realize how many other people are going through something very similar.
Yeah, find me one person who has nothing in common with anybody else.
Right. When you keep it in your own head, you can keep building. And I've obviously never been through the stuff they've been through. I don't want to pretend like I have.
Right.
But I have been through some things. And when you start talking to people, you realize then they'll start opening up with things that, and it's almost like therapeutic versus just trying to keep it all in your head. And It just keeps building and building and building.
Absolutely.
And then you almost can't get out of your own head.
Yeah. I mean, and I think feeling alone is an awful feeling. Feeling alone in despair, in pain. And again, this isn't all stuff I personally can relate to, but being scared and being afraid and hurting and grieving, physically hurting, doing that all by yourself is not how it's supposed to happen, right? We are human beings. We are designed to interact with other human beings. We are compassionate, some more than others. But I mean, there are things about human beings that make us human beings. And the more isolated, and I'm not saying everyone needs to have a million friends and be super social, because that's not everyone's personality, but being solo in all walks of life is not how we are designed to function well.
Well, don't they even say, like, in the various blue zones, there's different diets and different things, but the one commonality is that they have a very strong social connection.
Yep.
Eating dinner together or having their morning coffee, whatever the, culture is.
Yeah.
But, like, that's kind of the one common theme, more so than what they eat or what they're doing.
Yeah. And I think that's, with everybody, it's important to have those people, and it doesn't have to be a lot of people, but it's important to have those people. And I think kind of coming back to the veterans that I've worked on, and even some of the active duty guys still, it's also, from my perspective, from what they've shared, again, I'm not saying this from my experience, but there's the stuff that you share with them, right, with the other veterans and the other, if you're active duty still, like there's a certain type of sharing that goes on, and there's still a certain type of sharing that is less comfortable, though it's getting more comfortable. Especially, there's so many great veteran programs nowadays for them to talk about a lot of this stuff, because obviously I'm not the answer to that. But I think, especially because I'm addressing pain, that opens a door for many of those folks who come onto my table, and the realization of the importance of that conversation, whether it's with me again or just with someone that it actually does help to talk about it, whether it's related to the physical pain they came in to see me for or not. I think I've at least it has seemed that that's been an eye-opening moment for at least a handful of veterans that I've worked on, which has been a really beautiful thing. Yeah.
I say there can't be really much more like satisfying, or I don't know, satisfying, fulfilling than seeing your work help somebody in that situation start to improve.
Oh, I mean, obviously I want everyone to somehow be better because they allowed me to be part of their journey in whatever capacity that is. And that population in particular, I mean, the reason they're part of my pro bono, initially it was just veterans, because one of my really good buddies, when he stopped getting deployed, just the conversations we were having, I was just getting so angry. See, I get angry, people. I get angry. I was like irate, just conversations about the VA. And I know the VA, they have so much. I can't even imagine trying to deal with the stuff they have to deal with and the volume they have to deal with. But him being like, yeah, it's like in 3 months. I'm like, I'm sorry, what? In 3 months, you get an appointment just to get looked at? And like just the number of those conversations we were having, and obviously just prescriptions being written instead of actually trying to figure out what's going on. And so often he wouldn't go. And, and so like, that's a whole other issue. Right. And I get the frustration, but seeing no one also isn't necessarily the answer. So that was kind of where that turned. I was like, hey, I can help a lot of the reasons you are going to the VA. Not all of them, obviously, but I can help a lot of them. I can do concussion work. I can do back pain. I can calm your nervous system down, because it's been on red alert for 14 at that point years. There was a lot of stuff I could positively influence, and just conversations we could have. And the cool thing with the MPS is, regardless of who it is on my table, because of what I do outside of that in terms of the training and nutrition, if that person that's coming to me generally for pain or something is open to it, we can have a conversation about, are you willing to do this one exercise of homework? Are you willing to do this from a nutrition standpoint to further support why you came to me today? Even though you came to me for pain, these things can contribute to helping that as well. And so it's cool to be able to, and not everyone's open to it, and that's fine. But some people are, and that's great.
Well, that's incredible. And it's cool to see the work that you're doing. If, as we kind of wrap up here, what would you do? Like, let's say somebody is, whether it's, something as much as like a veteran going through some stuff, or just somebody simply not really happy with where they're at right now, whether it be nutritionally, fitness wise, they think they're too old to start, whatever it might be. Like, what would be one piece of advice that you would give them, like to start changing a habit, or to just start seeing things a different way, maybe?
Well, I will blanketly say it's never too late to start anything. Relatively. I mean, obviously, I'm sure we could find things that's too late to start, but I'm not going to be able to be a professional gymnast at this point in my life, but it's never too.
But it's never too late to start feeling better.
I mean, I had my 95-year-old client came to me when he was 79. He could barely walk. Like, talk about starting later in life, right? Like, it's never too late. But generally, when it comes to change, pick one doable thing. And remember, it's not always it doesn't have to be a removing thing. It can be, but it can be just an add. If a remove is easier, like from a nutritional standpoint generally, or if it's I'm going to go to bed, if you're trying to like get more sleep, go to bed earlier. There's a lot of things around that. But if you're trying to change the time, start small. It's going to seem ridiculous. Start with a 10-minute earlier window. Don't go for 30. That's a lot. When you actually try to do it, it's a lot. So pick small, doable things. If it's really easy, cool. Then you can either add another or increase whatever that one was that you very clearly rocked right away. But it takes consistency, not perfection, but consistency with doing the things.
And at least for me, I have found that momentum is a very real thing, good or bad, that if I can start building on very few little things, everything else will kind of go. But if I start slacking on hit snooze an extra time or whatever it is.
And that's where with the consistency, it works in every direction.
Yes. But, and it's weird because sometimes all of a sudden, you look at things, you're like, everything seems to be clicking and going really well because the momentum has built in the positive direction.
Yes. And you found
but it can go just as easily the wrong way. And you're like, what the heck happened? I can't.
And those are,
nothing seems to be working.
Those are important things and kind of conversations I'm always having with clients, because again, my place is not to judge anybody, and I try to get them to judge themselves less as much as possible, but understanding your whys. So let's take nutrition because it's an easy one. You're trying to eat better, whatever you think that looks like. Okay, that day just was awful. Okay, it was one day, first of all, right? The world didn't end. You lived to tell me it was one day.
Yeah.
But why? I want to know why. I don't even care that you had pizza for breakfast, donuts for lunch, and Taco Bell for dinner. I don't even care. I just want to understand why. What led to that, right? There was nothing at home. I didn't go grocery shopping when I was supposed to. I was tired. My meeting ran late. I was pissed. These are all reasons often why food goes off track, right? But it also happens, right? And understanding our personal whys is what helps us figure that out. Not only why something didn't go well, but why it went so well. Let's repeat why it went so well. What worked so well that day or that week for you? Oh, I was so on point. I did this, I did that. I cut this off at this time like I said I would. I actually did it, right? Whatever it is. And I think we kind of forget about those. We focus on what we did wrong, which is important to recognize and understand, but also focus on what you did right so you can rep that out more, right? Do the things that are working well for you, understand the things that aren't, so you can kind of tweak as needed in whatever way to turn those into the things that are working well. But start small, successful things, not things you think you should do, or ideally you're going to do what you know you will and can do. Start with that.
I think that's awesome. Well, Zamia, thank you. Where can people find you? I know you have both your Good Human Fitness Instagram page as well as the website, but I'll just let you tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, I mean, Instagram is definitely my most, that's where I am most. It seems to be the easiest these days. Good Human Fitness, all one word. goodhumanfitness.com is my website. Pretty straightforward. I do have personal Facebooks and personal Instagrams as well. So I probably won't add you if you try to. Those are private. More so just because kids and things like that are on them. And I don't want that to be public, but my business stuff is all public. And then my email address, if you wanted to email me, is also really easy. goodhumanfitness@gmail.com. Try to keep it as simple as possible. And I'm based in California. I travel when I can. The NPS is stuff I travel for. If I can get enough people signed up and booked, I'll pretty much go anywhere because I love to travel. And
I'm still going to have to try that sometime.
I was just thinking that. It's tricky. Like, I am very reliant on people elsewhere to help me find those clients since I don't live in the areas. But every once in a while I can figure it out. But yeah, so basically Instagram is probably the easiest way to find me. And I respond. So you message me, I'll reply, assuming it's appropriate.
Yeah. And I would say might even get a meme or two.
Go. Yeah. And depending on what happens, you may get memes back for the rest of your life. So.
Well, thank you again. I thoroughly appreciate this.
Thank you so much.
And I think, it's been fun. And I think we helped a lot of people, with just being able to look at things a little bit differently and, what we prioritize in life. And, go ahead.
The last thing that I'll say is often, again, this has been coming up a lot, but what I will often say to clients, when it comes kind of to anything, not just nutrition or training, but anything really, because I don't think people often do this, to actually write down what truly matters most to you, what you value, and what real priorities are for you. Some of that may change a little bit as we move through life, but there's often kind of some mainstayers there. And if you're struggling with a decision on anything, coming back to those can often clarify the decision. Because does it align with what you've indicated are your true priorities and what you value most? You can think it does, and it can be cool, and maybe you should still do it. But if you're struggling with something, I always tell clients, I'm like, go back to that and see if it lines up. And that might help you, because I can't answer the question for you, but that might help you answer that question, whatever it is.
Well, and that's awesome. And, and that made me think, and I know, like I said, I've been guilty of a lot of these things we've been talking about is, I'd imagine when they make that list and do that, be very true to yourself.
No one's going to see it. It's,
not what other people think you should be doing or should make you happy.
Exactly.
Because I've been guilty of that, where you try to conform, you're trying to make too many people happy and not.
Yeah.
You're not dialed in on what makes you happy or makes you tick.
Exactly. And there's the right answer, there's the wrong answer, if you will, but ultimately it's the honest answer, right? The honest answer is the right answer, right? And it's not for anyone else to see. I mean, you can share it, but it's for you. And there's, again, like, if being really wealthy is truly your priority, okay, does this decision change if that's truly your priority? There's no right or wrong. Like that, just because that's not somebody else's doesn't mean it can't genuinely be yours, right? Whatever it is, be honest in those answers. Honesty makes things ultimately easier, not always short term, but ultimately I like to believe being honest with yourself makes life easier.
I have a friend that always tells me, you show me somebody's results and I'll show you what they're committed to.
Yeah, right.
He's like, he's like, results don't lie. So let's start there.
And where do you, where you spend your time, where you spend your money tends to reflect, at least on some level, what your priority is. And sometimes we get off course, and that's okay. Having that reality check with yourself is important.
Once again, this has been awesome. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And thank you everybody for listening. If you have any questions, hit us up at podcast@volquartsen.com.